Greetings to all of my friends and family. During our time of quarantine or social distancing, whatever you might call it, I would like to take some time to share some thoughts with you over the next several days from the book of Psalms. We're going to look today at Psalm chapter 18. And in this chapter, David is writing as he is experiencing some very difficult times in his life. As David being the author, he wants to express to us his thankfulness and gratitude to God for his deliverance from his enemies. The information contained in the book of Psalms in this 18th chapter is a historical record of the things that David was going through in 2 Samuel chapter 22. If you'll notice the comparison between these two chapters, you will notice that this song that is recorded for us in Psalm 18 is the same as recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 22. This morning, what we want to notice is surveying the chapter, what David says. He's near the end of his life, and it seems that he is reflecting on the things that God had done for him throughout his life. It is also curious to note, if you go back to Psalm 17, it is a prayer of David for his deliverance, as he described his enemies as being the lions that surrounded him. Psalm 18 is now going to describe for us the deliverance that God provided for him. Today I want to share with you some thoughts from the first three verses of this psalm. Notice as the psalm begins, David says, "I will love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies." In these first three verses, David is giving his praise to God for what he has done. And you'll notice and find it interesting that the very first thing David does is express his love for the Lord. Although it may seem to you and to me to be a very simplistic statement that we should just very quickly glance by, I think it has great depth and great meaning as you look at the terms that he uses to describe his love and his dependence upon God. David, in this passage, is telling us that the love that he has for God is unique. In chapter 17 of Psalms, the language David used there was to describe the fact that that love was a covenant love. There is God's love that is so strong that you and I understand that he will keep his promises even when we violate his laws and his covenants. But the word that David is using here very simply means to yearn for. It is something that he wants to hold within his hands. And so what David is going to do is describe for himself, and what you and I can learn is this deep love, and to have a very deep spiritual meaning and a connection with God. What David very simply is saying in these three verses is that God has his arms wrapped around us as David had his arms wrapped around God. I want you to notice as you read through those three verses, if you will, the number of times that there's a word or a phrase that is preceded by the word my. What we need to understand is what David is going to do in this passage is give us a ninefold description of God's love for him. Notice David says that God is my strength, my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my mountains, my shield, my salvation, and my stronghold. Very simply put, in these 9 images, David is describing for us how God was his helper. And if you notice very quickly the strength and the security that is found in those images, when you see that David says that God is his rock, his fortress, his mountain, or his stronghold, all of those are the power symbols of God's power and God's strength. But then you go on and you notice David uses the word deliverer, shield, salvation, which very simply denotes the defense and aid that God provides for him. And that power is communicated maybe more clearly and more fully in the statement where David says that the Lord is his horn of salvation. That horn is always used to represent power, as in the power of an animal. And we could think of several different animals that have horns and how that they become very powerful when they use those horns. And so what David is saying is, God is my power of salvation, my power of deliverance. Therefore, David is very simply, as the verses begin, David is going to praise God for who God is. And then if you look in verse number 3, and we'll close with this. But notice there, and this is a song, a phrase that many of us have sung for many years when we were young people, and I think we need to probably sing it more often, where he says, I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised, and so shall I be saved from my enemies. When I think of that phrase, I will call upon the Lord, you know, we're in the midst of a time where there is some maybe uncertainty about this coronavirus. I believe that there will be something done and this will pass. But we need to call upon the Lord and have Him be the one who delivers us from this virus. Because you and I, as Christians, know, no matter what our opinion is, God is always in control. As the old saying goes, this too shall pass. Tomorrow we will look at verses 4 through 19 if you would like to read ahead. I would just like to say, in the words of my good friend Jeffrey Lewis, good afternoon and God bless.